Emotional connection, I think, is important in some ways, but not in others.
Why scientific marketing? Why is it so important?
There are specific guidelines and compliance standards that govern what can be said. So it's not just about creating a catchy tagline. It's about speaking to an audience that expects.
How do you help your clients tailor their messaging based on who they are?
If you're talking to an R&D team, very often they're going to clear scientific validation. What we do is we work with our clients to develop these in-depth content pieces.
What are some of your favorite books around marketing or psychology that you want to throw here on?
I read well over 100 books a year. If you're looking at the space of what's out there for science marketing books, it's basically me and Hamid.
Can you give us a sneak peek about what's in your book?
What I'm doing with this book, The Giant's Ladder, is providing a blueprint for...
All right, we're live. The guest I have today is amazing. Like, I'm so fired up for this episode. Let me tell you a few things before I introduce the guest. Just imagine running a business at the age of 10. You're probably thinking, what kind of business? How about a psychic hotline, right? And then imagine skipping school and going to college when you're 12, right? And then imagine to have like a really amazing career in the life sciences industry in different roles in marketing, public relations, what have you. And, go also on the other side of the spectrum and, try your hand at venture capital. The list goes on and on of what this guest has not achieved. I don't think there's anything left on the table. But this sounds like a movie, but this is the real story of the guest that I'm about to introduce to you. I'm super excited. Let's dive in and have a chat with Elizabeth Chabe. She is the CEO of High Touch Group, which is a marketing agency that's specifically helping life sciences and advanced engineering type organizations. And her new book, The Giant's Ladder, is also directed around, spreading awareness of why science marketing is so important today. So I won't waste any time, and let's go and say hello to Elizabeth. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Harsh. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, I'm so tempted to ask you about what you were thinking when you were 10, but I don't think the audience might care about too much about that because this is a life sciences podcast. But you were telling me something really important yesterday that this topic is very passionate. You're very passionate about it. This means a lot to you. Before we go into all of the different frameworks that are in your book, the case studies of all the work you're doing with clients, why scientific marketing? Why is it so important?
It's a really good question, Harsh. Traditional consumer marketing definitely has its strengths, and I don't want to take away from that. But science marketing, especially in the life sciences, requires a more nuanced approach. And we can talk about this all day about why, but I'll give you 3 quick reasons, and I'll explain briefly about each of them in turn. The first is just regulatory and compliance factors, technical depth and expertise, and then longer, more complex sales cycles. So just quickly, regulatory and compliance factors, in B2B life sciences, whether we're talking about instrumentation, reagents, diagnostics, biopharma, there are specific guidelines and compliance standards that govern what can be said and how and for different audiences. And unlike standard consumer advertising, these regulations really force us to be extremely precise, accurate, and transparent, which is a specialty that not all marketing agencies are ready to take on. The next piece is really technical depth and expertise. When you're marketing, say, a new lab automation system or a specialized CRO service, you're dealing with consumers who are highly educated, usually PhD level professionals, who are really looking for data-driven evidence that your solution works. So it's not just about creating a catchy tagline. It's about speaking to an audience that expects substance and proof and a clear demonstration of a return on their investment. And then lastly, these sales cycles, especially if we're talking about life sciences tools or solutions for hospitals and clinics, these are long, complex sales cycles. If you're selling to a research institution or a biotech, you're often involved on the marketing side of supporting the commercial team's effort to speak with multiple decision makers and stakeholders in an organization. So you're not just convincing one consumer to buy your toothpaste or one scientist to try your product. You're appealing to procurement teams, department heads, scientists with specific needs and budgets, maybe even IT departments in some cases. And so in the life sciences, most companies find it useful to work with agencies who understand that your messaging really needs to be tailored to these different audiences, that you need to comply with regulatory standards, and that there's a certain level of technical depth required in all of your communications.
Yeah, and you made a very important point, which is creating that messaging and knowing that you are on the other side of the table. You are talking to somebody that is extremely knowledgeable. Maybe they have a PhD, or at least they're advanced engineering or whatever skills they have, and it's different from if you're selling a car. And even when you're selling a car, you're targeting sort of a segment of the market. Let's say you're selling a minivan to parents who have kids, and you're basically focusing on the space and the roominess of the car. But if you're selling a luxury car, you're targeting a different messaging and framework. So it's still a car, it's still sold to people, but the messaging is different. So when you think of life sciences, as you mentioned, there is this diverse range of people that you have to, I don't want to say convince, but you have to make them understand the value of what you're building. How do you help your clients tailor their messaging based on who they're pitching it to?
Sure. So, it's going to be different with every client. So I'll just take a broad example. But essentially, you're right, focusing on stakeholders and the value that your service or product brings to those specific stakeholder segments is crucial. And for many of our B2B clients, these stakeholder groups often include R&D teams, lab managers, procurement officers, sometimes even end users within a clinical laboratory, for example. And so just a few examples. If you're talking to an R&D team, very often they're going to need clear scientific validation. So they're looking for tech specs, reproducible results, performance metrics under conditions that are relevant to their laboratory operations. And what we do is we work with our clients to develop these in-depth content pieces like white papers, application notes, peer-reviewed data summaries that meet that level of technical rigor that those audience members are looking for. When we're talking to procurement officers, which very often we are, especially if we're selling into research institutions or hospitals, hospital systems, really they're looking for a straightforward cost benefit analysis very typically. And we do what we can to support our commercial teams and our client sites to help develop that messaging. But they're also interested in things like vendor stability, long-term service agreements and what those look like, history of compliance. So even if we're not necessarily involved in the specific quoting process, we coach our client accounts to make sure that when a procurement officer visits their website, they're finding information around their quality system, they're finding information around their compliance standards, warranties, support, and so on. And then just one other example, we do a lot of work marketing to end users like lab managers or a microbiologist in a clinical lab at a hospital, for example. And really what these folks are looking for, these are your best friends, as anybody in sales listening to this would know, because these are your internal, potentially like the people who are going to be advocating for you sort of up the chain and laterally. So these folks are typically looking for operational efficiency. So will this tool or service increase throughput, reduce downtime, save costs, reduce workplace injuries, whatever the tool or service might do. And so for that group, ROI examples, total cost of ownership, case studies, especially around these particular pain points, can be really important because we're basically arming those people who usually don't take as much time to convince because these products and services are typically designed with those same end users in mind. So they're like, oh yeah, I get it. But then they need help with marketing materials that you arm them with to sell within their organization. So in the Giant's Ladder, I discuss this framework in more detail that sort of maps each stakeholder's core decision drivers, whether it's technical validation or cost effectiveness, and how to build tailored messaging for each group. But really, it's just about focusing on what matters to them. And I think later in this conversation, we'll get to some trigger points as well, because of course, story, messaging, audience, that's part of it. But then just making sure that the materials they need are available when they're trying to make these decisions and doing their research, and that your client isn't always in the place of reacting to a request, but you're making a lot of this information self-service for these potential customers.
Yeah, obviously I wasn't aware. I have to be honest, I wasn't aware of your book until I saw your bio and I knew that I was going to be talking to you. So I'm yet to go through the book and read it. And I just want to read it because I wasn't really interested into marketing until 2 years ago when I quit my job at a biotech company in San Francisco and started my consulting company. And my initial plan was just to go on LinkedIn and reach out to a few people that I worked with in the past, but that model faded like after 3 or 6 months, because it's obviously very, like, if I just want to be individual contributor type consulting roles, that's good. But if I want to build an agency, I had to really dig and read some basic marketing books. I think one of my favorite ones was, I think it's called 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. And it literally has like a law on each. It's a very short book. It's silly. I think some people might find it silly, but I found it really useful, and I applied many of those lessons. So this is a topic that I obviously want to learn more about, being in the life sciences industry. What do you, when you were early on in your career, or even now, like what are some of your favorite books around marketing or psychology that you want to throw here on?
Yeah, so this is actually my favorite question because I read well over 100 books a year, and I'm a big reader. I always have been. I don't read a lot of business nonfiction anymore these days, especially the marketing books, but the classics, definitely the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. That's great. I make all of my staff new hires, and I have done this for years, actually, not just at High Touch, but also at the Jackson Laboratory where I was prior to High Touch. We not only do they read my book now, but they read a book by Hamid Ghanadon, who's the CEO of Linus. He wrote a book several years ago called Persuading Scientists. And it's really a deep dive around his model for scientific messaging, so messaging that resonates with a technical audience. And it's one of the books I have every new hire read. It's a good one. And really, if you're looking at the space of what's out there for science marketing books, it's basically me and Hamid. My book is more focused on early in my career, I did a lot of work with researchers, both scientists and engineers, who are spinning companies out of universities or research institutions like national laboratories. And so my book is really targeting that audience. So if you've never had to go after venture capital before, if you've never had to sell something before, if you've never had to think about audience messaging alignment and ROI and things like that, then this book is really about how to build a marketing plan for a scientific product or service. And really, it's targeting those CEOs who are a little bit too early to work with a High Touch Group or a Linus or these other big agencies that are out there, because they don't have the budget and they just don't have enough knowledge about product market fit yet. But they need to get that knowledge so that they can eventually get the funding they need and work with other partners like us and others. So the two books are two slightly different takes on the same topic. So I would recommend both of them to your listeners.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are I definitely would also read the one from Hamid. And then obviously influence is a classic one that a lot of people, I don't know if it comes in under marketing or under sales, but psychology, I don't know the different categories of books, but I hear influence is an all-time classic that many people find useful. Yeah. So you mentioned about ROI, and that's something I also wanted to ask you. So when you think about, let's say, somebody that's listening to this, they're like, wow, Elizabeth, sounds great. Like your book sounds great. Everything you're mentioning is making a ton of sense. But how do I get the money, right? Like, or how do I go to my management and tell them I need to work with high touch, or we need to, think think about our marketing strategy? Because if you think about products that have a technology advancement to it, or maybe a high quality of raw materials going into the product, those are all tangible attributes where you can go to your management and say, hey, I found this amazing technology that's going to make our drug work in such a different fashion, and therefore I need money to do the R&D, or we're going to be using these type of raw materials and it's better than the other company that's not using them, so we need money. But marketing is almost this unseen uh, thing where people are like, but it's in the mind. It's almost like you're creating value that's not really seen clearly. So I'm curious, how have you gone through those situations where people have asked you to build a case as to why they should invest in something like this?
Sure. So my role now with clients is very often being essentially the chief marketing officer with the clients that we serve. And so I'm deeply involved with senior leadership strategy development. And so very similar to a chief marketing officer or an SVP of marketing within a company, like an internal marketing lead, I'm constantly having to show ROI on marketing programs. So, I'm there alongside my commercial lead. Usually, it's the head of a sales team or a chief revenue officer or something like that. Trying to get more marketing budget, or yeah. So there are lots of ways to do this, and it's again different for each company. But I can give maybe 3 pointers that I think are just easy to remember and really helpful. So, and these are very applicable to life sciences, B2B, but also could be applied to some other tech industries that we work in, like climate tech and space tech. So, very specifically, you have to understand your quantifiable KPIs, your quantifiable key performance indicators. We track some leading indicators like conversion rates, lead quality, and things like that. But really, what you're trying to do is figure out the overall sales pipeline impact that your marketing activities are generating. And these lead cycles tend to be, the sales cycles, tend to be very long with life sciences, as you know, whether we're talking about a service provider or a tools company. And the sales pipeline impact is very important. We tend to with companies we know very well, when we understand their sales process very well. We really want to be focusing on revenue at the end of the day. If the marketing program isn't working, if we're not seeing revenue, so what I mean by quantifiable KPIs, I really mean money at the end that's coming into the company versus money spent. There are these leading indicators, right? Are we bringing in enough website traffic? How are ads performing? Are we getting enough clicks? But that is not what marketing's job should be, reporting just on these leading indicators. That is the old way of KPI management. So we really stress working very closely with sales teams. I mean, sales and marketing should be basically inseparable in organizations, in my opinion, so that anything that we're doing that isn't directly mapped to some sort of larger organizational initiative like brand awareness or thought leadership or something, that we're directly measuring the impact on sales and making adjustments as necessary to support the sales team and help them close. And that can run the gamut from helping make specific assets. It can mean being involved in helping develop account-based marketing programs. So there are all sorts of ways that we do that, but quantifiable KPIs that are specific to your organization that you're working with is number one. That's very important. The last piece that's related to this is, sales cycles are long, but they don't always have to be. Part of the reason they're so long in life sciences is because there isn't enough marketing fuel thrown on that sales cycle fire. And so a lot of what we often are looking to do at the strategic level is work with the commercial lead to reduce sales cycle length. So in B2B life sciences, a sales cycle could be 6 to 18 months, sometimes longer. But with well-executed marketing materials that are relevant, we can shave weeks, often months, off of that cycle by preemptively anticipating and answering the questions that are typical of the different audience segments within those organizations that we're helping sell into. So that's also important. And then my last point on this topic is really long-term brand equity. So even though brand perception might not have a single dollar value attached immediately, it does affect how quickly your product is adopted, how top of mind you might be for other customers that are within your target. And when you're recognized as an industry leader or you have a strong reputation for innovation, then you often shorten your future marketing efforts. So not everything you do in marketing should be or has to be directly tied to a sales result, although that should really be probably where something like 75 to 80% of the emphasis is. But there is that 20 to 25% that's about building the brands in your customers' minds so that it's a much easier sale. And again, that goes towards not just winning more revenue, customers coming to you instead of you having to invest so much in your marketing. So having a nice inbound funnel. And then, of course, reducing that sales cycle overall. If somebody already trusts your brand, it's a lot easier to sell into that organization. So again, in the Giants Out Ladder, I outlined some of this blueprint that pairs some of these traditional sales metrics and brand building metrics.
Yeah, so the one that I want to really double click out of the three that you mentioned is brand equity, right? And this is where I've observed let's just say, for example, if I'm watching a football game or I'm watching something on TV, the quality of ads from pharmaceutical companies has become so much better in the last 10-15 years. And before, it used to be, hey, this is a drug, you take it for such and such, this is how it works, and that's it. And now I see more of a storytelling format where the ad is on and I can't even tell that it's a commercial for a drug, and it's become more cinematic. It's almost like you're watching a movie. And this is really important for some of the rare diseases or drugs like gene therapy, where you show, I forget which commercial it was, but I can't remember. It was a commercial of two sisters, and one of them was like playing a piano from her childhood, and the father was sitting and he was watching, and then they were showing like flashbacks of her in the childhood, then her going to college, then back again to the childhood, then getting a job, then back again to childhood, then getting married. Like, it's almost like somebody's spending a lot of time building that 60 or 120-second commercial. So I want to ask you this: why, like, is this the new way? Like, why is this? Have you seen this trend where every brand is thinking really hard of how do they convey their story, or how do they convey the story when they're selling?
Sure. So I have two thoughts there. The first is, if you are marketing to consumers, you absolutely have to touch them in a way, right? Emotionally. There is so much great research out there around how consumers interact with brands, how brands kind of almost become part of personalities. You use a brand to show in many ways to sort of speak for what sort of person you might be and what your values might be. And so when it comes to, marketing so when you see those drug commercials on TV, right, they are obviously trying to make that emotional connection with their audience. And you see this with consumer brands all the time. Now, with B2B, I would argue that storytelling is important. Emotional connection, I think, is important in some ways, but not in others. And so, I see a lot of brands using, for example, commercial photography and videography that is very much meant to pull on heartstrings, but it's in a piece of collateral that's being used to sell a life science tool to fill in the microbiologist, right? It's not really about story and emotional connection at that point. It's about the value. To your point earlier, it's about the features. It's about, are you providing those internal champions the right tools they need to sell? Is the ROI there? Is there good clinical data you can share? And so, I think storytelling is important for a different reason, though, as opposed to the sales piece. I think it's that brand piece. So to your point, how do you build long-term brand equity as a life sciences tool company, for example, or a service provider in the life sciences space? And I think the way you do that is very similar to the B2C space, in that you are telling a story, but you're not just pulling on heartstrings and making an emotional connection. You're also making an intellectual connection with those, because so if I'm selling, for example, I'm going to lead with my expertise. I'm going to get right into kind of problem solving with somebody. I'm not going to talk about some of the things you introed with. Actually, I don't know if anybody has ever mentioned the psychic hotline thing or like stories from my youth, right? And those things, if I were to make an Elizabeth Chabe or a High Touch Group commercial, of course I could play on some heartstrings by talking about some of those things, but it's not the right audience for that, right? And so again, this comes down to audience messaging alignment, and you can wrap these messages in different ways. That's part of a creative team's job, really, is to execute the messaging strategy in a creative way for specific audiences. And sometimes they'll choose to do that through these emotional connection building moments. Sometimes they'll do it more intellectually. It really depends on who they're trying to sell into, or if it's a brand awareness campaign, who they're trying to make that connection with.
That's a good distinction that you made. And one of the examples, as I was researching for this episode, so I know you do a lot of work where you're working with companies to help them present at conferences or even set up their booths and stuff like that, right? Because I see that, yeah. Because I was looking at one example. So I was researching and I came on this of how demoing. So for example, if you are buying a software, most of the times you get free trials, you get a demo. Some people put the demo on their website like a video so you can see how it works, and you get the free trial, you try it, right? And then 7 days later they charge you. And one of the companies in the devices or life sciences space, Intuitive Surgical, did something really genius, right? So they're like, hey, instead of just going to a conference and standing there with our logo and giving out white papers and talking to people, why not put a surgical equipment and show how it works? So I couldn't find which conference they did that, but I was researching, and they were one of the first few companies who actually took a robotic surgical equipment to a conference, and it was just there. It was working, and people were able to see it. And the surgeons, or people who actually were supposed to use that equipment, they were able to they were able to see firsthand what it looks like. Not a white paper with a photo of the surgical equipment, but hey, this is the equipment. Imagine this in your surgery theater or surgery room, and this is how it's going to work. Do you know of any examples like this where you come across either with your clients or somebody else, and you immediately take your notebook and you're like, okay, this is genius?
Yes. Okay. So I think that's wonderful. Anytime that, so I have a chapter in my book about trade shows specifically, and I would encourage people to read that chapter before you sign up for a trade show at all, because they're incredibly expensive. And if you are sitting there in a booth with your logo and a white paper, to Harsh's point, it's 2025, people. Let's get a little bit more creative. So, yes, if you are going to exhibit at a show, being able to demonstrate your technology or do something else interesting in your booth space to attract the foot traffic you're looking for is really important. So, at a high level, if you can get on a podium, so if you can present at that particular conference, get your abstract in, plan a live demo, rehearse it and rehearse it and rehearse it, make sure it works, and get on that main stage. If you can't get on the main stage, which is usually true for small companies, your exhibit absolutely needs to be more interesting than your logo and some handouts. If you have a demo that you can do in your booth, you can set up a schedule. If it's not something you can have running continuously, you can get the biggest screen. One time, like years ago, Harsh, probably 12 years ago, I had, before you could rent these things readily at shows, my team actually built a massive wall of 12 different massive LCD monitors for an event, so that we could run video demos in different ways across any combination of those 12 screens. And we had this like circuit board of Mac minis in the back of it attached, so we could run different videos and stuff. So basically, some other great things that you can do, you can have demos that are scheduled, and you can have people register for those demos, and then they're getting into your CRM and they can be scheduled in your booth. If you don't have something to demo, which is often the case, if you're a services company, I mean, how are you going to demo contract, research services or, clinical and regulatory services, right? We really encourage good content in all of our accounts, as you can probably imagine from all the content talk we've had so far. You can host a live podcast in your booth. You can do an interview where you're hiring a videographer to come in and do an interview. People are walking by and seeing that sort of activity in your booth. You can live stream a podcast, as you know. You can live stream your thoughts about the event, right? There are all sorts of, you can throw a party in your booth and invite people, right? So literally for the cost of $5,000 in catering, you can get a lot of foot traffic in your booth that's relevant to be there physically for a demo, or you can do something interesting with video monitors. You can do something interesting with bringing equipment. All of these things cost money, of course. So check out, I think it's chapter 7, just so that you're being realistic with your trade show budget. But sky's the limit. And this is where marketing agencies can really support you, because a lot of this takes logistics. Internal event staff and organizations are great with certain logistics, but some of this stuff really does require professional videography, or at least just having somebody on hand at the event who can do things like mic testing and making sure that the podcast live stream is set up properly. All the things you're very familiar with, I think, Harsh.
Yeah, that's a great example you mentioned about doing a live stream podcast. I saw something like that last year. I went to what's the conference? It was CPHI in Barcelona last year. Huge conference, and I only went there because I have so many friends and people that I know in Europe, and I was traveling to India, so I was like, I'm just gonna stop and go there, because I knew like 5 other people that I had never met. I only knew on LinkedIn, and they were going, and they're like, yeah, why don't you come there so we can catch up? But I saw some of this, what you're saying, which is I saw some software companies that had literally workstations set up, and you could just sign up and you would get a 20-minute slot, and you would just go there and demo the software and ask any questions. So that's the one you mentioned. I saw that firsthand. I saw this recording of a podcast, or I don't know if it was a podcast or a webinar, but it was happening right there in that booth. And just the fact that somebody was standing there with the video equipment, people passing by were like, what's going on? Let me look up this company. It had no fancy, nothing. It just had a logo of the company and a plant, and it was 2 people sitting and talking, but it was enough to, stand out from the crowd, because the 100 booths next to them were not doing it. And so those are great examples that you mentioned.
Your secret weapon in any of this is ideas and then execution. And what I find is that very often, if you're a large organization, sometimes your events team has just done things the same way and it's sort of cookie cutter, and they might be managing 30, 50 events per year. And so this is really where just bringing in some new ideas, whether that's a really creative internal lead for some of these or partnering with an agency, because you get that perspective, right? And you get the ideas, and it's not necessarily about doing more just to do more. It's related to getting the ROI you're looking for from these very expensive events that are incredibly valuable, but not if you're just standing there with a white paper. So yeah, great questions.
Yeah, I know you also travel a lot, right? Where are you right now? Because I know you mentioned to me before that you've been to some countries in Asia and then you were in South America. So where are you?
I've lived in 26 different countries. I was in Vietnam for 3 years until the last 3 years. I've been outside of Guadalajara, Mexico, in a small community here.
So why are you in all these places? Because it sounds like if you're a CEO of an agency for life sciences, you should be in like San Diego or Boston or San Francisco or Philly.
I love this question. Okay. No, this is actually, it's an important part of the thought process for High Touch Group. And if you're a CEO of an agency, you kind of geek out about those business models too. You can be a traditional agency and have a headquarters, and you can be located with good proximity to these life science sectors. So, Chicago, Cambridge, Boston, London, San Francisco, San Diego. Why not? Because it's really expensive. And one of my biggest arguments for a long time, which maybe makes me sound like a traitor to the agency world, is I think marketing agencies charge too much. Not because what we're doing isn't incredibly valuable, but I don't think we need all of that operational overhead. And so High Touch's model has always been to be fully distributed. So we've been fully distributed since we started, 15-ish years ago. And what that means is we are more cost competitive, I think, than most companies. And it's pretty easy to jump on a plane and get anywhere within a few hours these days. And we have these great tools like Zoom that allow us to talk to people all over the world any time of day or night. So, and our team is located worldwide as well. And that's also part of our model for similar reasons, making sure that we have 24/7, 365 coverage for clients. So, I think, marketing agencies, if you think like Mad Men era and like the Madison Avenue days, I think even some of these specialty agencies have sort of said, oh, well, we're just going to duplicate that, but in our areas. There's no reason you need an office in New York. There's no reason you need an office in Boston. It's very expensive. And, especially if you're trying to attract young talents, which I am always, remote is really important to them. Being able to have some trust that you're going to just create your own schedule and still get things done. So, and honestly, I spend a good portion of the year traveling for shows. If you're in the space, I go to something like 25 trade shows a year. So do I really need to be in Boston? I'm there, probably every month anyway. So
Yeah. I don't know how you do it. I can't. I've got so many people asking if I'm going to. I can't do more than 5 in a year. I think 5 is like my max.
Yeah, it takes some stamina.
I know I don't want this to be too long because I know you have to go. You have other things to do. We haven't really even gone into your book, but I want to ask you just one question before we end this. Is can you give us a sneak peek about what's in your book, or why should somebody buy your book, and then how can they get a copy?
Yeah. So what I'm doing with this book, The Giant's Ladder, is providing a blueprint for scientists and engineers who are taking those first steps in becoming entrepreneurs. They're maybe spinning a technology out of a lab, as I said. And, that is a very critical stage for your technology or your service. The single biggest mistake that I see founders make all the time is this assumption that the technology's value is self-evident and that all they need to do is maybe publish the research in a couple journal articles and hey, Nature's published something about them. So they're going to just sell like hotcakes, whatever this tool is or service. Founders, especially founder scientists, often think we have groundbreaking data. Surely everyone will see its importance immediately. And it's, like, just spoiler alert, that is never true. Never, not once. Even if it appears true, it's because there's a really solid agency helping them. So without a clear, cohesive narrative that addresses these specific customer concerns, the messaging gets lost. You might not even know if there's product market fit. And so what this book really is trying to do is to set scientists and engineers up for success, so that they can take those first few steps, not waste a bunch of budgets trying to buy ads that they don't need, attend shows that they're not ready for, and instead get the basics right. And if they can get the basics right or pretty close, they're going to be able to attract customers. They'll be able to show traction to investors and hit those investor milestones. And that's really what the book is framed around. And you can buy it. Sorry, I should probably pitch this better. This part too. Please buy the book. You can buy it on Amazon, all major retail sellers. There's an audio version you can find on Chirp, in most libraries, on Audible. There's an ebook version you can get. Most of the buyers have been like commercial teams in biopharma. You can buy in bulk through my website. Go to elizabethschabe.com. And I'm sure Harsh will have that in the show notes. In fact, there's a form on there if you inquire about this book and you want to place an order through the website. Just type in Life Sciences 360, and my team will reach out with a 10% discount off your bulk orders. And if you are a student or you really just don't have budget to purchase the book, please don't let that block you. Just reach out to my team on elizabethschabe.com and we'll send you a free PDF. I'd much rather get this in more hands than fewer. And last but not least, lest you think, oh, she's an agency CEO, she doesn't need more money, why would I buy her book? Besides the information that's in it that I really did try to provide to help you not make mistakes, the profits from the book go to support animal rescue charities worldwide. And in specific, right now, we're working with some charities here in Mexico, dog rescue specifically. And then High Touch Group's profits also go to support charities at the end of each year, mostly in public health and some in climate tech. So buy the book, support dogs, and email us if you need it for free. Happy to do that.
Yeah, I think we should end the podcast there. Buy the book if you love dogs. But that's an amazing thing that you're doing. I think more people should do that. I'm guessing we're all doing some initiatives on the background, but this, for you to mention this on air and do it is a great example, and I hope that other CEOs also follow this, including myself. So thank you for doing that. We'll put all those links in the show notes. So yeah, we covered a lot today. You explained to us why science marketing is important and how to basically understand the concepts and how to measure the ROI. You also gave some really nice examples of different types of things that you're seeing at conferences or different techniques that have been used. So I'm sure the audience is going to find this very useful. And if if they love this podcast, they also get your book and maybe contact you for possibly working with you. I know you have a 3-year. Is that correct? Is that a 3-year wait list to work with your team?
Yeah, it might even be 3.5. I keep saying 3, and it might be 3.5 at this point. But yes, we're waitlisted. But if we're not a good fit, we will reach out to you. And if we're not a good fit to put something on, we have recommendations in the space. There are only a handful of life science agencies out there. We've worked with most of them, and so feel free to contact us, if only for unabashed advice.
All right. Thank you, Elizabeth. This was a great conversation, and that's all we have here on this podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation with Elizabeth, I'll link another episode somewhere on the screen here. It's going to be one episode we had in the past with David Ormisher. He's also in the marketing world. Really amazing person, has a lot of insights on combining the science with storytelling. So if you enjoyed this, I'm sure you're going to love what David had to share in that episode. And that's all, Elizabeth. Hope your new year started really great and wishing you tons of success in 2025.
You as well. Thanks, Harsh.